In this story, a poor servant finds a lost queen lying outside his kitchen on a stormy night. What happens next will change both their lives forever. But before we begin, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more powerful royal stories like this one. Now, let's begin the tale of the servant who saved his queen. The Kingdom of Nuvora stood proudly beneath the restless skies, its marble towers and golden domes glowing faintly even in the dusk. Inside those walls lived thousands, nobles, guards, cooks, and servants, each moving like small pieces in a giant, unfeeling machine. Among them was a man named Amir, a quiet kitchen servant whose hands were rough from years of scrubbing stone floors and carrying iron pots heavier than his hopes. He spoke little, smiled rarely, and never looked directly into the eyes of royalty. Every morning before the palace awoke, he lit the kitchen fires, fetched water from the courtyard well, and prepared food that others would eat long before he could taste a bite. To most, he was invisible, a shadow passing to the halls of luxury. Yet beneath his silence lived a deep sense of loyalty, the kind that never asked for reward. The Queen, Liana of Nuvora, had once smiled at him during a royal feast months ago. It was a brief, passing kindness, one he never forgot. And now, that same queen was gone. For 3 days, the palace had been in chaos. The queen had vanished after a royal banquet, poisoned, the whisper said, and no one knew whether she was alive or dead. The courtyards buzzed with rumors. The nobles pointed fingers at each other, while the guards stormed to the villages beyond the gates. Every servant feared being accused of treason. But Amir stayed quiet, performing his duties even as fear crawled through the kitchen walls. That evening, a violent storm gathered above the kingdom, a storm so fierce that even the torch flames bent sideways in the wind. Thunder rolled across the hills like drums of war. The cooks abandoned their tasks, and the guards sought shelter in the armory. But Amir remained behind to secure the kitchen doors and cover the food stores from the leaking roof. He had done this every night of every storm. But tonight, fate had chosen him for something far greater than duty. As Amir stepped out to the back door to retrieve the last barrel of water, the wind almost pushed him off balance. Rain lashed across his face like cold needles. The palace garden, once bright with lilies and trim hedges, was now a blur of mud and broken branches. He lifted the barrel, ready to retreat, when his eyes caught something strange, a faint movement near the far stone wall. At first, he thought it was an animal caught in the storm. But as lightning flashed across the courtyard, he saw it clearly, a woman, lying motionless on the ground, her clothes soaked and torn. His heart froze. He rushed to her side and turned her gently. Her skin was pale, her lips trembling with the chill. Around her neck hung a golden locket, cracked open, revealing inside a tiny portrait, the queen's own face. Amir's breath caught in his chest. It couldn't be. The entire kingdom was searching for her, and she was lying here, half dead, behind the palace kitchen. For a long moment, he couldn't move. Every instinct told him to run, to call the guards, to do what a servant should do. But something in her lifeless expression, that same kindness he had once seen in her eyes, stopped him. He looked around. No one was there. The storm drowned every sound except the roaring thunder. "Your Majesty," he whispered shakily, but there was no response. Amir knew that if he reported this, the wrong people might reach her first. The palace was no longer a safe place. Everyone knew there were traitors among the lords. Without another thought, Amir lifted her carefully into his arms, shielding her face from the rain with his tattered cloak. She was lighter than he expected, fragile as a fading candle flame. Each step through the muddy path felt heavier than the last, but he didn't stop. He slipped out of the palace grounds through the back gate, a path few remembered, and hurried toward a small hut on the edge of the servants' quarter. There, the wind howled to the wooden walls as he laid her on a straw mat near the fire. He lit the single oil lamp he owned and looked at her again. The Queen of Nuvora, bruised, breathing weakly, and helpless in a servant's home. The night seemed endless. Amir tore an old cloth to wrap her wounds, boiled water, and searched through his herbs for anything that could ease her pain. He didn't know medicine, but desperation taught him courage. The rain outside slowed to a whisper, the thunder fading into distance. He sat beside her, watching her chest rise and fall, afraid that if he blinked, she might disappear again. When he brushed a wet strand of hair from her forehead, he saw the faint trace of poison burns on her neck, proof of the whispers that had filled the palace. His hands trembled. Who could have done this to her? Her own family? The nobles who dined at her table? The thought filled him with quiet rage. He turned to the window. The palace lights flickered far away like dying stars. For the first time in his life, Amir, the silent servant, the invisible man, felt a spark of defiance within him. He whispered to the sleeping queen, "Don't worry, your majesty, I will keep you safe." That night, as dawn began to glow faintly behind the clouds, Amir sat awake beside the fire. The queen stirred slightly, her lips moving but no words escaping. He gave her water and waited, watching every sign of life like it was a miracle. The storm had left behind silence, a heavy, sacred kind. In that silence, Amir's life had already changed forever. He didn't know what dangers awaited him, or what betrayal would come next. He only knew that destiny had chosen him, a man with nothing, to protect the one person who had everything and lost it all. The first light of dawn crept through the cracks of Amir's small hut, painting the wooden walls in shades of gold and dust. The storm had passed, but its echoes still lingered in the wind, a quiet reminder of the night that had changed everything. Amir sat beside the sleeping queen, his eyes heavy from the long vigil, his heart pounding with every breath she took. Outside, the roosters crowed, the servants in nearby quarters began to stir, and the distant palace bells rang for morning prayers. Amir knew that soon, soldiers would begin their search again. If anyone saw her here, in the home of a servant, it would not only mean death for her, but for him as well. Still, he couldn't bring himself to move her. There was something sacred about her presence, something that felt like destiny itself had entered his life uninvited. When the queen finally opened her eyes, they were filled with confusion and fear. She tried to sit up, but the pain pulled her back down. Amir quickly placed a hand under her shoulder, whispering, "Please, don't move. You're safe here." She looked around, the clay walls, the dim lamp, the rough floor, nothing like the palace chambers she once ruled. Her lips trembled as she spoke, her voice faint but sharp. "Who are you?" Amir bowed his head slightly. "My name is Amir, your majesty. I work in the palace kitchen." The queen's eyes softened for a moment, then darkened again with worry. How did I get here?" Amir hesitated. He didn't want to frighten her, but truth was the only thing she deserved now. "I found you behind the kitchen wall last night, unconscious. I couldn't leave you there, so I brought you here." For a long time, she said nothing, only stared into the flickering flame of the lamp. Finally, she whispered, "You should have left me. If they find me here, they'll kill us both." Amir shook his head slowly. "If I had left you, your majesty, you'd already be dead." His tone was calm, steady, the kind of courage born not from power, but from purpose. The queen looked at him, truly seeing him for the first time. His clothes were torn, his hands bandaged, his face lined with fatigue. Yet there was something unshakable in his eyes, a quiet strength she hadn't seen even among her royal guards. She turned away, her voice breaking slightly. "You don't understand. It wasn't outsiders who tried to kill me. It was someone inside the palace." Amir frowned. "Inside?" She nodded weakly. "The poison came from my own cupbearer. The wine was meant to silence me forever." Her words fell like stones in the silence. Amir felt his stomach twist. "But who ordered it?" The queen closed her eyes, as if the truth itself was poison. "My husband's brother, Duke Heron. He wants a throne for himself. He made the council believe I was plotting against the king. When I realized his plan, I tried to warn my husband, but before I could speak, the feast began and I felt the poison burn inside me. For a moment, Amir forgot his place. Then we can't stay here. They'll be searching every corner of the kingdom for you." His voice carried urgency, but the queen only smiled faintly, a tired, broken smile. "And where will you hide a queen, servant? The walls have eyes, the streets have ears." Amir paused, then looked toward the small window. "There's an old tunnel under the palace vineyards," he said quietly. It was used long ago by the guards when the kingdom was under siege. No one remembers it now, except maybe the oldest among us. The queen looked surprised. "How do you know this?" He replied, "My father was one of those guards. Before he died, he told me about the tunnel. It leads straight into the old wine cellar, beneath the throne hall." The queen's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of hope crossing her face. Before she could reply, a sharp sound came from outside, a soldier's voice shouting orders. Both froze. Amir quickly blew out the lamp and motioned her to stay quiet. Through the thin cracks in the wooden wall, he saw shadows moving. 3 soldiers, their armor clinking as they searched each hut in a row. "Open up! By order of the Duke!" one of them shouted from outside. The queen's hands trembled as she clutched the edge of the mat. Amir whispered, "Under the floorboards." Quickly, he lifted the loose wooden planks beneath the straw bed, revealing a narrow hollow space barely wide enough for her to fit. She hesitated, but his eyes told her there was no choice. She crawled in, and he covered the planks again, scattering straw and a blanket over them just as the door burst open. The soldiers stepped in, dripping with sweat and rainwater. "You there, servant," one of them barked. "Have you seen anyone suspicious?" "A woman." Amir kept his head bowed. "No, sir. Just me." The storm kept everyone inside. They scanned the room, one soldier kicking the barrel, another eyeing the bed. For a terrifying moment, one of them leaned down, pressing his hand on the very plank beneath which the queen lay hidden. Amir's throat went dry, but then the officer scoffed. "This place stinks of poverty. The queen would never hide here." They turned and left, slamming the door behind them. Amir didn't move for a full minute. Only when the sound of boots faded did he kneel down and pull the planks open. The queen gasped for air, her face pale but eyes burning with emotion. "You lied for me," she said softly, almost in disbelief. Amir nodded. "It's not the first lie I've told to survive." He helped her sit up, offering water. For a moment, silence hung between them, the kind that speaks louder than words. Then she said, her voice breaking slightly, "You risked your life for me, even when my own people turned against me. Why?" Amir looked down at his hands, scarred from years of labor. "Because loyalty doesn't need a crown, your majesty. It just needs a heart that remembers what's right." The queen stared at him, not as a ruler, not as a woman above him, but as someone who had found an unexpected ally in the darkest hour. For the first time since her fall, she felt something close to safety. That night, the palace torches still burned in the distance, and the sound of horses echoed faintly across the valley. The queen lay resting, her wounds slowly healing, while Amir sat by the door, guarding her like a silent shadow. Every creak, every gust of wind made him reach for the small knife he kept hidden beneath his cloak. But despite the fear, something had changed between them. An invisible thread of trust had begun to form. 2 souls from different worlds, bound by fate, caught in a web of lies and loyalty. Amir looked at her sleeping figure and whispered to himself, "Tomorrow we leave before sunrise." He didn't know how they would survive the journey or what awaited them beyond the walls of Nuvora. But he knew one thing. He would rather die protecting her than live knowing he did nothing. And as the moonlight brushed her face, the servant who had once lived in silence felt a purpose stronger than fear itself. The world was still wrapped in shadows when Amir opened his eyes again. Dawn had not yet broken, and a thin fog lay heavy across the servant quarters like a veil of secrets. He quietly gathered what little he owned, a torn cloak, a piece of bread, a small flask of water, and the rusted knife that had once belonged to his father. The queen stirred as he moved, her voice soft and weary. "Is it time?" Amir nodded. "We must leave before the soldiers begin their rounds." Outside, the kingdom slept, unaware that its lost queen was about to walk among forgotten paths of her own land. Amir helped her to her feet. She was still weak, but determination burned in her eyes. They stepped out into the chill of early morning, their breath visible in the mist. The path behind the servant quarters led toward the outer walls, a narrow passage few dared to take, because it wound to the palace vineyard and into the deep forest. Amir led the way, his steps silent, every sound magnified in the silence, The crunch of gravel, the distant caw of crows, the faint rustle of wind through dead vines. The queen walked beside him, her torn robe trailing through the dew-soaked grass, her head covered by his cloak. The first light of dawn began to rise when they reached the edge of the forest. From there, Nuvora looked like a dream, the towers fading in the mist, the palace shining faintly in the far distance. "We must move quickly," Amir whispered, scanning the tree line. The queen hesitated for a moment, glancing back toward the palace that had once been her home. Her voice trembled as she said, "Everything I built, everything I believed in, it's all turned against me." Amir looked at her, his expression calm but firm. "You can rebuild it, Your Majesty, but only if you survive." The words seemed to strengthen her. They entered the forest, where the sunlight barely touched the ground and the air smelled of earth and rain. For hours, they moved through the tangled roots and dripping leaves, guided only by memory and instinct. Sometimes they heard distant voices, soldiers calling to one another, and each time Amir would motion for silence, pressing her gently against the trunk of a tree until the sound faded. At one point, they crossed a small stream, the water icy against their ankles. The queen stumbled, nearly falling, but Amir caught her before she hit the ground. For a moment, their eyes met, close enough to see the exhaustion in each other's faces. "You should have left me," she whispered. He shook his head. "And you should have ruled a kinder kingdom. But here we are." For the first time, she smiled, a fragile, fleeting smile that reminded him why he was doing all this. By midday, the forest began to thicken, the ground rising toward the old hills that guarded the palace's forgotten tunnels. Birds scattered from the branches as they passed, and the air grew warmer, filled with a hum of unseen insects. They stopped near a ruined watchtower, its stones crumbling under moss and vines. Amir studied the ground until he found what he was searching for, a half-buried trail of flat stones leading toward a slope. "It should be there," he said quietly. The queen followed his gaze. "The tunnel," he nodded. "If the stories were true, it's hidden under the old vineyards beyond this ridge." But before they could move, they heard it, the distant rhythm of hooves pounding the wet earth. The queen's eyes widened in fear. "They've found us." Amir turned sharply. "Run." They broke into a desperate sprint through the forest, branches whipping their faces, leaves scattering under their feet. The sound of horses grew louder, closer, until Amir could see the glint of armor through the trees. He grabbed the queen's hand and pulled her toward a narrow gully. "This way." They slid down the muddy slope just as arrows whistled past them, striking the trees with violent cracks. Amir turned, drew his knife, and faced the first soldier who leapt down after them. The clash was brutal, the kind of fight born out of survival, not skill. Amir blocked the sword with his forearm, pain tearing through him, but he didn't let go. He struck back, the blade finding its mark. The soldier fell. The queen watched, frozen between terror and awe. Another man followed, shouting, and Amir tackled him to the ground, wrestling until the soldier's helmet rolled away and his screams were silenced by the mud. When it was over, Amir stood trembling, blood and rain mixing on his face. The queen touched his arm. "You're hurt." He shook his head. "It's nothing. We must keep moving." They climbed the ridge together, both panting, their clothes soaked and torn. The forest opened up to a wide clearing, and there it was, hidden behind overgrown vines and half-collapsed stone. A dark archway led into the earth, the entrance to the forgotten tunnel. Amir pushed aside the vines, revealing the cold breath of air that drifted from within. "This is it," he said. The queen looked at the darkness, then at him. "If we go in there, there's no turning back." Amir nodded. "There's nothing to turn back to." For a long moment, they stood in silence, two souls on the edge of fate. Then the queen stepped forward. "Let's finish what we started." They entered the tunnel, the sound of dripping water echoing around them. Inside, the world seemed to hold its breath. The walls were damp, carved from old stone, and the air smelled of forgotten centuries. As they walked deeper, the light behind them faded completely. The queen held a torch that Amir had lit with trembling hands, the small flame dancing across the walls like ghosts of the past. "This passage leads to the old wine cellar," Amir said, his voice low. From there, we'll find a way into the throne hall. The queen's gaze hardened. Then that's where the truth will return. But even as her words echoed softly through the darkness, Amir knew the hardest part was yet to come. Behind them, somewhere in the forest, the soldiers had found the trail of blood he left behind. The chase was not over, only delayed. Still, he felt no fear now, only purpose. Each step echoed with meaning. Each breath carried the weight of destiny. The servant who had once been invisible now walked beside a queen, guiding her through shadows toward justice. And though neither of them spoke, something unspoken had taken root between them. Not love, not yet, but something deeper, a bond forged in danger and trust. Ahead, the tunnel turned sharply, and faintly from far above came the muffled sound of palace bells. The same bells that once marked the queen's glory now marked her return. Amir tightened his grip on the torch and whispered, "We're close, Your Majesty, very close." The queen's hand trembled slightly as her fingers brushed the hidden door that Amir had revealed. The torchlight flickered, painting her face in uneven shadows, a face torn between fear and determination. Behind her, the muffled sounds of pursuit still echoed faintly through the stone corridors. Amir's breath came heavy and uneven, but his eyes never wavered. "Your Majesty," he whispered, "this tunnel will take us straight to the lower stables. From there, we can reach the inner courtyard unseen." She looked at him, the servant who had given up his safety, his name, even his place in the world, for her. For the first time since her poisoning, she allowed herself to trust. "Then lead the way, Amir," she said softly. "I will follow." The heavy wooden door groaned open, revealing a narrow passageway choked with dust and cobwebs. The smell of damp earth filled their lungs as they stepped inside. Every footstep echoed like a heartbeat in the silence. The tunnel was long, built centuries ago for secret escapes during wars, and no one had walked in decades. As they walked, Amir's mind raced. He thought about the night he found her, the storm, the broken locket, the way her breath had barely stirred. If he had been just a moment late, she might not have survived. And now, here they were, two souls, bound by danger, walking through forgotten veins of a dying kingdom. Halfway through the tunnel, Queen Liana stumbled. Amir immediately caught her, his hand steadying her shoulders. Her face was pale, her steps weak, and when she looked at him, her voice was faint but sincere. "Amir, why are you doing this?" she asked, her words trembling like her breath. "You could have left me there, no one would have blamed you." He hesitated. There were 1,000 things he wanted to say, but the truth was simpler than words. "Because, Your Majesty," he said finally, "I saw truth in your eyes that night, and I couldn't let truth die." She looked at him for a long time, her eyes glistening in the dim light, and for that single moment, the walls of rank and blood seemed to crumble. She was not a queen, and he was not a servant. They were just two human beings fighting for life. Suddenly, a sound cut through their fragile silence, metal clashing against stone, echoing from the tunnel's entrance. Amir froze. "They've found the passage," he muttered under his breath. Without thinking twice, he took the queen's hand and began running deeper into the darkness. The tunnel began to narrow, and faint rays of moonlight appeared ahead. The exit was close, but the footsteps behind them grew louder, closer. The queen's gown snagged against a stone wall, tearing at the hem, but she didn't stop. Amir could hear soldiers shouting, their words sharp with fury and command. He knew they had only moments left. As they reached the end, Amir climbed up first, pushing open the iron grate that led into the stable courtyard. He reached down, grabbed her hand, and pulled her up just as the torchlight of the soldiers appeared in the distance. The grate slammed shut behind them, and for the first time that night, they breathed open air. Outside, the storm had calmed, replaced by a heavy silence that carried the scent of wet earth and dying embers. The palace loomed in the distance, its golden spires glinting faintly under the moonlight. It was both their destination and their danger. Amir guided Queen Liana along the outer wall, their shadows merging with the darkness. "From here," he whispered, "we can reach the garden gate. Beyond that, the royal chambers are only a few steps away." She nodded, clutching the edges of her torn gown. Every sound, a rustling leaf, a drop of rain, made her flinch. When they reached the gate, Amir stopped. The guard post was empty, but a single lantern flickered near the path, casting long, watchful shadows. "Wait here," he said softly. "I'll check ahead." But before he could move, the queen's hand reached for his wrist. "Amir," she said in a low, trembling voice, "if anything happens, promise me you won't die for me." He turned to her, eyes fierce and unflinching. "I didn't save you to die halfway, my queen," he said. "I saved you so you could live and rule." She wanted to protest, to tell him that his life mattered too, but before she could speak, he was gone, moving silently through the shadows toward the palace. Minutes passed like hours. Then, suddenly, a cry echoed in the distance. The queen's heart froze. Amir reappeared moments later, blood on his arm but fire in his eyes. "It's clear," he said, breathing hard. "We move now." Together they crossed the courtyard, every step heavy with risk. They reached the marble steps that led to the queen's private chamber, the same chamber where she had been poisoned weeks ago. As she stepped inside, memories flooded back, the betrayal, the pain, the faces of those she had trusted. Her trembling hand touched the carved wooden table where the poisoned wine had once been placed. "It was here," she whispered. "They tried to kill me right here." Amir looked around, every sense on alert. "Then we ended here too," he said firmly. The queen turned toward the door that led to Grand Hall. Her voice was calm now, steady with purpose. "Summon the guards loyal to the crown. It's time the truth meets the light." Amir nodded, his eyes soft but proud. As he left to gather those few men still loyal to her, she stood by the window, staring at the dark sky that was slowly giving way to dawn. For the first time in a long while, she felt strength in her chest instead of fear. The queen who had been hunted like prey was ready to rise again, not just to claim her throne, but to reclaim her name. Outside, Amir's footsteps echoed through the silent halls of Nuvora, carrying the weight of a promise made in the shadows. The storm had passed, but the war for truth had just begun. The first light of dawn crept into the royal corridors as Queen Liana stood before the Grand Hall, her eyes fixed on the golden doors that once symbolized her power and her betrayal. Behind her, Amir returned, his tunic stained with dust and blood, but his spirit unbroken. "They're here," he said quietly. "The loyal guards and the traitors too." She gave a small nod, straightened her torn gown, and stepped forward. The hall was already filling with courtiers and nobles, summoned by the strange news that the missing queen had returned. Whispers filled the air, disbelief, shock, fear. The same men who had conspired against her now bowed low, pretending loyalty. Liana's gaze swept over them like a blade. "Raise your heads," she commanded, her voice steady and sharp. "Look at the woman you tried to bury." The crowd froze. The chancellor, the man who had orchestrated her poisoning, stepped forward, masking his panic with a practiced smile. "My queen, what madness is this? You were presumed dead. How dare this servant bring an impostor before us?" Liana turned toward Amir, her eyes meeting his. Then, without a word, she lifted the broken locket from her neck, the one Amir had found that stormy night. Inside, the portrait gleamed faintly. "This locket was given to me by my mother," she said quietly, "the first queen of Nuvora. Tell me, Chancellor, wouldn't an impostor know that you replaced the royal seal with your own?" Gasps filled the hall as her words struck like thunder. The Chancellor's face went pale, his mask cracking. "You have no proof," he spat, his voice trembling now. But before he could say more, Amir stepped forward. "Proof," he said, his tone calm but piercing. "The night the queen was poisoned, I was in the kitchens. I saw your men bring the cup, laced with venom from the royal apothecary. I cleaned the cup myself after she collapsed." He turned toward the guards. "The man who delivered it is standing among you now." A murmur of outrage rippled through the hall. One of the guards, terrified and trembling, fell to his knees, confessing everything. "It's true." The Chancellor ordered it. He said the queen was unfit to rule. The hall erupted. Soldiers rushed forward, seizing the traitor as the Chancellor tried to flee. But Amir was faster. He caught the man by the arm, dragging him before the throne. "You tried to destroy a kingdom for your greed," Amir said, his voice low but burning with quiet fury. "You poisoned your queen and framed your own man." Lyanna stepped down from the dais, her expression calm, too calm. "For years I trusted you with my life," she said softly. "You repaid me with death. Now I repay you with justice." Her gaze turned to guards. "Take him away." The Chancellor screamed as they dragged her from the hall, his cries fading down the corridor until only silence remained. For the first time in months, that silence didn't feel empty. It felt clean. When the hall emptied, only Lyanna and Amir remained. She turned to him, exhaustion and relief mingling in her eyes. "It's over," she whispered, though her voice trembled with something deeper, gratitude, perhaps even sorrow. "It's only over because of you." Amir bowed his head. "I only did what was right, my queen." She stepped closer, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. "You did more than that. Amir, you reminded me that the crown means nothing without the heart to protect it." Outside, the first rays of sunrise spilled through the stained glass, painting the floor in gold and crimson. The Kingdom of Nuvora had survived its darkest night. In the weeks that followed, the queen restored order, rewarding those who had stood loyal and banishing those who betrayed. Amir was offered riches, lands, even a noble title, but he refused them all. He chose instead to serve in silence, guarding the palace gates where his journey had begun. People often whispered his name, the servant who saved a queen, the man who changed a kingdom, but Amir never claimed glory. When asked why, he would simply smile and say, "I did nothing grand. I just stood by what was right." And somewhere in the quiet of the palace gardens, when the wind rustled through the jasmine, Queen Lyanna would pause, close her eyes, and whisper his name, not as her servant, but as a man who had taught her what loyalty truly meant.